Force 13 presents the top 10 cyclones that exploded overnight. How the strongest typhoon of the decade was only expected to reach Category 1 status. The storm that became the poster child of pinhole eyes. And a storm that became 115 miles per hour stronger in 24 hours. Most tropical cyclones are fairly easy to predict in terms of intensification. You look out ahead of the storm and look at what conditions they've got, and generally they'll ramp up at a steady rate if conditions are good. But there are some explosive anomalies that are in the annals of history, cyclones that absolutely exploded in intensity, sometimes literally overnight. We're going to take a look at some of the top 10 most quickly intensifying storms that went right through the gears from tropical storm status all the way to Category 5 in the blink of an eye.
So it was an ordinary day when Depression 2W got designated. And by that time, we pretty much thought nothing of it. It was April. It was, not usually time for when storms blow up in that part of the world.
The first Joint Typhoon Warning Centre's forecast had this storm gradually intensifying near Yap, and then intensifying further as it headed through the Philippine Sea, reaching a Category 4 peak. And then, after that, the track of the storm was less certain. Would it affect land? Probably not.
But blow up, it did. It ballooned, and before long it received its name. It was Category 1, then 2, then 3, then 5.
This, of course, being the massive beast that was Typhoon Surigae in the 2021 typhoon season. Extraordinary for this time of year to get a Category 5 storm, although not that uncommon, but this storm went above and beyond, not just reaching Category 5 status, which starts at 160 miles per hour, but reaching an estimated wind speed of 190 miles per hour and a pressure estimate of 888 millibars, making it amongst the strongest storms the Western Pacific has seen in the last 10 years.
And it was really close to the Philippines. But then it decided to curve away from it, and it took us all by surprise. I remember making the update video, I believe it was update number 6, where the opening line was continues to blow expectations out of the water.
Well, as we follow the rest of the storm's track, of course it moved more slowly as it was passing Luzon, making that second closest approach. The storm's closest pass to the Philippines was to Catanduanes, and then it passed very close to the Daito Islands of Japan as it was weakening down to a tropical storm, and then through Iwo where it turned post-tropical, extratropical for a good while as it moved on towards the northeast, way up towards the Aleutian Islands. The storm wasn't completely without impact either, and it also produced 44 units of ACE, which is quite a lot. It killed 15, however, and damaged nearly 5,000 buildings, destroying 282 at least. So certainly a storm that, despite not making landfall, did actually have some impacts. In monetary damages, 11 million as a matter of fact, and 511 millimeters of rainfall. And now on to another storm that stretched the seasonal limits. Of course, in the Western Pacific, storms can form at any time of year, but it is still less likely to see the stronger storms near the end or at the start of a year. Well, Typhoon Nida in 2009 became an exceptionally powerful Category 5. In fact, it became the strongest storm, certainly in the Western Pacific, of the entire decade. Well, it was going well, and then it stalled for a good while and lost a lot of its strength. Of course, at this time of year, it was going to lose all of that strength anyway, as it continued further north in the Western Pacific. Look how powerful our estimates have given Nida, 200 miles per hour and a pressure estimate of 881 millibars, an exceptionally fast strengthening phase. It depends on which analysis you use, but generally accepted to be within 80 to 95 miles per hour of strengthening there in just a 24-hour period. Well, Nida didn't cause any known impacts, but there is an image of it near its peak intensity, not too far from some of the islands of Micronesia. They were the closest parts to the storm, and then the closest big island or bigger island would have been Guam, seen on this radar loop. They certainly got a few squall lines from the outer edges of this storm. Nida is a beauty and our favourite kind of storm, powerful storms that actually don't cause any impacts. And now one of the classics from the Pinhole Eye school of typhoons. First forming in the eastern part of Micronesia, going on a very topsy-turvy track through Chuuk, and then on into the Philippine Sea where it became a tropical storm, Forrest. Continued northwesterly and then rapidly intensified at extraordinary pace, more in terms of its pressure than its winds, but still very much so on the wind front as well. Continued through the Ryukyu Islands into the East China Sea, still quite powerful at this point, and then gradually weakened as it moved on towards the coast of Japan. A tropical storm landfall in Kyushu, and then through the rest of the main Japanese islands, turning post-tropical as it exited the eastern coast. Forrest was extremely powerful with winds of estimated 180 miles per hour, but look at the central pressure, 876 millibars as indicated from the Chinese Meteorological Agency's records. In fact, if you follow their data, they allege that the storm intensified by 99 millibars in 18 hours, an average of 5.5 every hour. So much more to say about this storm as well, just how tiny its pinhole eye was when it was reaching its peak. Really exceptional, so much so that the fairly low resolution satellites at this time period were barely able to see it. Of course, back in these days, we still had recon planes in the Western Pacific as well, and they were circling around the storm near its peak too, really looking phenomenal. Now, even though the storm had weakened by the time it reached Japan, it did cause substantial and some places severe damages, so it was not a harmless storm by any means, with significant flooding reported, inundating vehicles, and this flood map or rain map shows that the significant high amounts of rainfall were occurring around Kyoto and off towards the northeast of Nagoya in the mountains. Well, going by the numbers, 38 fatalities in the end from this storm, which is obviously significant. 46,000 buildings damaged, very significant, nearly in the top 200, and at least 100 destroyed. I imagine that's due to lack of information. It was probably a higher number than that. 86 injured in the end, and 540 millimeters of rainfall was the highest recorded during the passage of this storm. And now for another monster of a storm that strengthened by 100 knots in 24 hours. That would be Typhoon Karen in 1962, which would also become the third most impactful storm in Guam's history. The storm was the strongest to ever make landfall on the island, as a Category 5 still at this point, and a massive ace producer as well, as it maintained a lot of that strength for a long time, several days. With satellite imagery very much in its infancy, we can't really see the progression of the storm as it strengthened. It tended to be recon planes that would confirm the storm's intensity over sometimes several hours or even days, depending on where exactly the storm was in the open ocean. It was of course paramount for the US military to be monitoring the progress of Typhoon Karen, what with Guam and the Mariana Islands having a large military presence. But of course no amount of monitoring could prepare everyone for what would happen next, with this storm rapidly intensifying. Not only that, it held on to most of its intensity, and by the time it reached Guam it still had winds of 175 miles per hour sustained. Of course, the storm was visible on radar imagery, a little sequence of images that we have here showing the storm's approach. And of course, the storm caused major damage on the island, major structural failures, corrugated metal being strewn all over the place, of course tree damage, trees being snapped in half and sometimes debarked as well. And of course lots of vehicles involved being crushed under heavy structures, metal beams, wooden beams even as well. Some of these buildings were still constructed out of wood, and lots of other issues across the whole island. Well, let's look at the numbers then. In total, Karen killed 37. It caused damage to 3,000 buildings and 5,000 were destroyed. As a matter of fact, quite a high number for an island. And then taking a look at the actual damages in terms of monetary amounts, $250 million, which was quite a lot at that time. I imagine that was probably close to, if not one of the top 10 typhoons at that point. This might be one of the most overlooked storms out of this top 10, but it was Typhoon Kit in 1966. A storm that gradually intensified at first, reached typhoon status, and then eventually towards the start of the 25th of June, by the way, early in the season, it launched like a rocket. From 80 knots at the start of the day to 170 knots by the end of it. That is 195 miles per hour. It was very much a flash in the pan storm as well. It didn't actually last very long. It of course went towards the east coast of Japan, not too far from Tokyo on the 28th of June. Thankfully by then it was a little bit too early in the season for it. It had weakened substantially. Imagine if that had happened later in the season though. The storm would have been much more powerful by the time it got up there, but thankfully at the end of June sea surface temperatures still aren't quite up to scratch around Japan. The storm of course peaked quite far north for this time of year as well. It was getting on for 20 degrees north when it did reach its peak intensity, which I find quite extraordinary. Probably the most at-risk location was what we saw on the opener to this section, and that is the island of Minami Daito. Two small sets of islands off the coast of Japan, quite isolated from the mainland. Regrettably, there's not too much to show of this storm. The satellite imagery of the time is not particularly great, and no real impact pictures from this storm either. So all in all, this storm did kill 108. A very damaging storm, in fact, in parts of Japan. Lots of flooding issues, 128,000 buildings damaged, the 93rd highest worldwide, and 433 reported destroyed. 91 injured and 760 millimeters of rainfall, the highest number in this storm. Quite a high number as well. That's in the top 200 of world storms. And now a very familiar storm in this top 10, Hurricane Otis. Whilst it didn't strengthen very quickly at first, once the brakes were off on the 24th of October, it was pretty much overnight that this storm rapidly intensified, gaining 80 knots of wind speed in just 9 hours. This storm peaking as a Category 5 as it made landfall in Mexico. Of course, as we know from another top 10, it wasn't the best forecasted either.
Was initially just forecasted to be a tropical storm or maybe a minimal hurricane before making landfall, and then all of a sudden it intensified into a Category 5 hurricane during the night time.
Yes, a storm that literally blew up overnight, and you can see just how the eye managed to appear in those later frames before the storm made landfall in Mexico. Extremely dangerous, extremely frightening, I would imagine, to those along the coast, and the fact that this happened overnight leading up to that landfall. The storm, of course, could have been stronger if it just had a little bit more time. I guess that's one of the most frightening parts about Hurricane Otis. It popped up out of nothing in October 2023 and certainly was massive in terms of how it outdid the forecast time and again.
Because it's the only Category 5 hurricane ever to strike the western side of Mexico. So it's also one of those weather events that are really odd, really rare.
The wind pressure chart shows a classic story of that V shape in terms of the pressure, and obviously the inverted V shape with the wind profile just shows how much of a spike that storm had when it intensified. Cesar tells us what intensity the storm was when he went to bed that night.
Possibly around 50 to 60 miles per hour if I'm not mistaken. Then when I woke up, it was already a Category 5 hurricane, and I was like, what in the world has happened?
The impacts from the storm were profound over a wide area. You can see here on this chart just what happened in Acapulco. Most buildings damaged and plenty of them destroyed as well. And this drone shot showing the immediate aftermath of the storm as well, showing a very weathered looking city of Acapulco. Hurricane Otis killed 82 in the end. Serious damage, 160,000 buildings impacted and 52,000 destroyed, in the top 100 on both counts worldwide. In monetary damages, it is one of the costliest storms in the Pacific Ocean, if not the costliest, $12 billion, the 22nd highest worldwide. An impressive, impeccable storm near its peak. One of the classics, an example of a storm that rapidly intensified extremely quickly, and it still holds up today, which is why Hurricane Wilma is number 4 in our top 10 storms that exploded overnight. From a Category 1 straight to Category 4, then a Category 5 with its extraordinary peak in the Western Caribbean. Extremely powerful, holding on to most of its intensity by the time it reached Cozumel and Quintana Roo as a Category 4, then on to Florida as a Category 3 after briefly weakening to a 2. I think we all know about how impactful Hurricane Wilma was, extremely powerful as well, with an estimated ACE touching 40.
Hurricane Wilma, not a storm that I specifically tracked, but have done research into from the record-breaking 2005 Atlantic hurricane season. So going back to 2005, it was a very exceptional year. So obviously getting to W on the naming list is extraordinary in itself. But Hurricane Wilma was the fourth and final Category 5 hurricane of the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season.
I was only 7 years old when Hurricane Wilma occurred. I was nowhere near where the storm occurred, but I remember that hurricane was really highly covered by the media. It was a really popular storm and still very popular in Mexico, still nowadays.
Going through Wilma's history and timeline, it became a hurricane on the 18th of October and then entered a period of explosive and rapid intensification before the next day attaining its Category 5 status and its record for the lowest central air pressure of 882 millibars.
Of course, it wasn't just the maximum wind speed that was so impressive along with that low air pressure, but the rate of the strengthening leading up to it as well. In an 18-hour period, the storm strengthened by 85 knots, and in that same period dropped its pressure by over 90 millibars. And let's not forget its striking appearance either, with this classic pinhole eye structure which looked absolutely mesmerizing, and to watch it oscillate around the eye wall structure in there is really a sight to behold.
People really were like scared with about the storm because of how slowly it was moving towards the northwest and then to the north, and it stayed like 2 days nearby the Yucatan Peninsula, where basically was the perfect formula to destroy everything on its path. And that's why it really was a very popular and also devastating hurricane in the Yucatan Peninsula, mainly in Quintana Roo.
The storm then brought all of its might to Florida with a substantial storm surge and obviously very strong winds from a major hurricane landfall. All in all, Hurricane Wilma killed 52. Not a massive total, but of course preparation and warnings were good for this storm. Everyone knew it was coming, it was so strong. We don't actually have much information about actual numbers of buildings damaged or destroyed, but in total monetary damages topped over 20 billion, the 11th costliest storm worldwide.
Still, some beaches where Wilma crossed in Mexico had like scars, had their mark, and still not really recovered from the storm.
Now onto another headline-grabbing storm in 2015, Hurricane Patricia, of course. Whilst it was decent in terms of the warnings that were given out in a timely manner, the storm was only forecasted to be a Category 2 in the first few advisories. It was very quick, as we saw. We know exactly what it did, an extremely powerful Category 5 storm, and still the most intense and powerful in the Western Hemisphere.
I could say that Patricia genuinely scared me. Like I felt chills on my body because how this monster intensified after the before I went to sleep it was a minimal hurricane or a tropical storm, and then when I woke up it was a 2,200 miles per hour hurricane.
Update 2 on Hurricane Patricia, currently with winds of 160 miles per hour and a pressure of 924 millibars, a Category 5 hurricane in the East Pacific, moving position 16.2 degrees north, 105.1 degrees west as of 3 a.m. UTC on October 23rd. The NHC forecast calls for even more strengthening in the next 12 hours, where it will reach a peak of 165 miles per hour expected, and a landfall in Mexico as a significant Category 4 storm. But look at the eye wall around it, a spectacular eye wall, almost beyond what we've ever seen, really. That's at the current time. We don't anticipate the storm to be as strong by the time it makes landfall, but this certainly is not a good omen. Update 3 on Major Hurricane Patricia, which is located off the coast of Mexico with winds of 200 miles per hour and a pressure of 880 millibars. The strongest storm pretty much that we've ever seen. It's remarkable, the only storm that I've seen like this is Haiyan, and for its wind speed of 200 miles an hour, that I've never seen before, except in some 1950s typhoon names, which may or may not be true. Along with those breathless updates from back in the day, a lot of variety in imagery that we can look at. Recon, of course, flying through the storm on several occasions and famously got the 879 millibar reading when the storm was first on its way to intensification towards that famous peak pressure, which is only an estimate based on that recon flight. Of course, also there was lots of radar imagery from those planes too, and of course what we've seen from Patricia on satellite. Extremely impressive, and I don't think there's too much more that we need to say about that. Of course, the storm's impacts were still ahead of it as well. The storm did thankfully weaken a little bit before landfall. It was actually forecasted to strike as a Category 5 at one point, and operationally I think it did, but it was revised downwards to 155 miles per hour. It also struck a more sparsely populated place than, say, the likes of Hurricane Otis, which struck a significant city. This area was much less built up, but there were still several communities in the direct path of the storm which sustained major damage.
A record-breaking landfall, of course, the most intense until Otis came 8 years later. But what really impressed me about Patricia, of course, the intensification phase, how perfectly the storm looked on every kind of satellite imagery, infrared, water vapor, cloud tops, minus 90 cloud tops around the whole body of the storm, not just the ring of the eye, but the whole body itself. It really was an incredible storm to see. Nothing near from the previous most intense hurricane in the Eastern Pacific, which was Linda in 1997.
So total numbers in terms of impacts from this storm: 12 fatalities, 8,000 buildings damaged and over 1,000 destroyed from this storm. Those numbers could be higher. In terms of monetary damage, it's not by any means the highest we've seen. It's in the hundreds of millions, 283 we believe, the 363rd highest worldwide. This storm, if it did impact a more populated area, would have been disastrous. Most people will know Typhoon Vera for its extraordinary impacts in Japan. Of course, it has its own special name, the Isuwan Typhoon. But Vera was also an extremely quick intensifier as well, in fact one of the fastest ever. It got from 70 knots to 155 knots in just 12 hours. That's an increase of 85 knots. Incredible. That's the official advisories going off their estimates, of course. In terms of the actual data that we have at hand, 70 mph winds is what recon planes recorded on the 22nd of September at 7 AM UTC. But at 5 AM the next day, on the 23rd, it had winds of over 180 mph from recon, and it looked like it was starting an eyewall replacement cycle. However, the storm did overcome it and held its intensity remarkably well. Official estimates still place the landfall at Category 5 status, although observations on the ground do dispute that. The storm was still in 920s or lower 930s by the time it did make landfall. Winds by that point though were probably down to around 120 to 130 mph. Of course, a contributing factor to the storm's impacts was its prior strength. Being a Category 5 for so long, having this massive amount of energy and significant size, meant that this storm was an enormous storm surge disaster, particularly for the area around Nagoya. In some districts, 1 in every 100 people were killed, and in the case of Kisasaki in southwestern Nagoya, nearly 1 in 10 perished. In some places, particularly along the coast near that region, floodwaters didn't recede in some instances for months, as a matter of fact, well into the winter of 1959 to 1960. In terms of forecast performance, things weren't too bad from that perspective, although forecasts were regularly taking the storm further west from where it eventually made landfall. In terms of early warning, it could have been better. The storm struck on a weekend, and warnings were issued a little bit on the late side. All of the main warnings were issued a day before the storm arrived. Vera sent reverberations through Japan with its impacts, and you can see why looking at the numbers. Over 5,000 were killed by this storm, 371,000 buildings damaged, and 833,000 destroyed, the 5th highest known worldwide. In monetary damages, 600 million, which was one of the highest for a typhoon back in those days, and 38,000 were injured by this storm. Clearly, the impacts were there at short notice for a lot of these people. Vera is also possibly the only typhoon to ever have an anime made from its impacts, which was released 30 years after the storm event. A storm that's similar to the last one in many ways, only it's a lot more recent. This is Typhoon Hagibis in 2019, which extremely intensified on the way to the Mariana Islands with a pinhole eye, and then its second Category 5 peak as it started to drift northwards and then unleashed itself towards the coast of Japan. By some estimates, this storm strengthened by an astonishing 90 knots in 16 hours. Of course, it's a massive surprise to see so much intensification, although the way up towards its high strength was foreseen. Models have been extremely bullish on the development of this storm. As a matter of fact,
We've never seen anything like the confidence that has been depicted from the models. 92% of them say that it will reach major typhoon status, that's category 3, and 60% say category 5. For reference, Typhoon U2's first forecast, 4.6% of models called for a category 5. Typhoon Hagibis has rapidly intensified over the course of the last 12 to 24 hours and is now a massive category 5 storm with our estimated winds of 180 miles per hour and a pressure of 896 millibars. And this storm is continuing to strengthen at this time.
The way it just went from a tropical storm straight to a category 5 like that in like 12 hours is just, that's just unheard of. And the explosive intensification as well over the warmer sea surface temperatures of 2019, and it had low wind shear as well.
Way before getting to Japan, it was a big threat to the Mariana Islands as well, slotting between the islands with its tiny pinhole eye. The storm lost some of its strength down to category 4 status, but after an eyewall replacement cycle came back fighting with a much larger eye and looked impressive once again as a second category 5 peak. The storm then weakened a little bit before it reached Japan, but still carried a lot of strength and devastation with it.
Typhoon Hagibis made landfall earlier in Kanagawa and is now moving inland towards the northeast, with winds estimated of 90 miles per hour and a pressure of 956 millibars at 9 p.m. local time this October 12th. The CDPS is looking to Tokyo right now for its potential impact, catastrophic quite potentially in many areas. Stage 7 on the CDPS, mainly due to its rainfall potential but also its wind size.
I think it was one of the worst storms to ever hit Japan because of the damages and the amount of it spawned a tornado, and on top of that also had an earthquake that did hit Japan alongside it as well, which caused even more damage alongside Hagibis as well.
So it was another storm that had a lot going for it, this rapid intensification phase and its impacts on land. 102 fatalities in total, at least 93,000 buildings damaged, although we don't have a number for buildings completely destroyed. I imagine it's quite a few. In monetary damages, at least $9.6 billion in damage, the 29th highest worldwide. Hagibis was an exceptional storm on multiple counts. That concludes the top 10 cyclones that exploded overnight. And now to recap the top 10. Typhoon Surigae 2021. Typhoon Nida 2009. Typhoon Forrest 1983. Typhoon Karen 1962. Typhoon Kit 1966. Hurricane Otis 2023. Hurricane Wilma 2005. Hurricane Patricia in 2015. Typhoon Vera in 1959. And a number 1, Typhoon Hagibis in 2019.